you been wondering how to break free from the affair once and for all? Now's the time to take back your life, your emotions, find happiness, joy, and fulfillment with your marriage. HealingBrokenTrust.com is the place where you can find resources to take the healing journey to the next level. You'll find incredible resources for every stage of your affair recovery journey. Connect with our team of qualified affair recovery therapists who stay current with the ever-growing, ever-changing affair recovery research that's available to help you heal wherever you are in the process. Take our home study course focused on helping you communicate and express yourself in a way that gets you what you want. You can also book an incredible one-on-one intensive retreat where instead of dragging out the pain over months or years, you can condense the time it takes to heal in just a matter of days using scientifically proven methods that work to help couples lower their guard, let go of the fear, melt the anger, and experience each other at a deep emotional level you may have never experienced before. So what are you waiting for? Go to HealingBrokenTrust.com. But don't take our word for it. Read the client letters and listen to the reviews on the HealingBrokenTrust.com website. So go to HealingBrokenTrust.com and we'll talk to you soon. Welcome to Healing Broken Trust podcast with Brad and Morgan Robinson. Brad, today let's answer the question of when should or when do people just decide to let the relationship die after infidelity? You know, at what point do they just throw in the towel and say it's over?
Okay, Morgan, that's a good question. When do people decide to just give up on the relationship?
Yeah, and why?
Well, I think people give up on a relationship after a very long and difficult process of introspection, and I think they really are considering the cost and they're really weighing it. Mm-hmm. I think there's very few people who actually leave a relationship on a spur-of-the-moment decision or who don't really weigh the cost and really think about it. Most individuals in our culture, I would assume, I've never seen any research on this, but I would assume probably have a very conservative view of marriage, especially their own marriage. You know, when I'm getting married, what I mean by that is I'm getting married, it's for life. I took vows, I said I do. You know, even if we got married in front of a drive-through in Vegas, it was, when we did it, I really meant it.
So really their goal, most of the time, people are not getting married saying, okay, 6 months, I'm going to cheat on them, and I'm just going to throw in the towel.
Yeah, nobody does that. So most people have a really, I think, high view of marriage. A lot of younger people aren't getting married. They're putting marriage off. It's not because they don't value marriage, or they just want to live together or have kids out of wedlock or anything like that. It's that they really value marriage, but they value it and they want it to last. Mm-hmm. So they're like, is this really going to work?
Right.
I don't want a divorce like my parents did. Nobody in my family, really had a successful relationship. I want us to have a successful relationship. So they're really, because they value it, they put it on a high level. They want to make sure it works.
Or at least they value the idea of fidelity and their relationship working and staying together. Even if they don't necessarily believe in the concept or idea of marriage, they still believe in fidelity.
Yeah. They believe in, everlasting love.
Yeah.
And now, obviously, that's not everybody. I'm assuming 80% of the population would have like a conservative view of marriage.
Sure.
And they're very committed to their marriage.
Right.
And we're going to work through stuff come hell or high water. Everybody always says, unless you cheat on me, that's the exception.
Right. But in the face of the actual infidelity, people really do want to work on it. They even if they say, I'm not going to stay with you if you cheat on me, they typically...
when it happens, they throw that out the window and they're like, I'm going to make this work. There's a period where they don't know, uncertainty and ambiguity where they don't know.
That's normal.
But there is a point where over a period of time where people... And I'm talking, this takes a while. This is not like short-lived.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the only times that I've seen it where it's actually short-lived is when people have, kind of ties into what we talked about last time, are their wounds too big to heal, ties into when they haven't really had a chance to develop a bond
Mm-hmm.
within the first 2 years. Now, you can develop a bond, and you can have a deep bond with somebody and not always felt connected to them or always been happy, but you have a bond.
Mm.
You know, because a lot of people, you know, are like, I've never been happy, I've never felt content, never felt fulfilled. But, you know, if you're with somebody for 2 years, no matter why you got married, if you were, you know, if you got pregnant and you had a shotgun wedding, you know, you're with them years down the road, you know, you have a bond with them.
Right.
And you may have not always felt happy in the relationship, you have a bond. So what I'm trying to say is, you know, there are times where people will leave a relationship fairly quickly because they had to leave previous relationships quickly. They had to cut off from a parent growing up. They were severely abused growing up. They had to cut off contact with a parent just to survive. And so they're going to be somebody who may leave a relationship quickly.
After infidelity?
After infidelity, or just period.
Oh, okay.
Just not even after infidelity, just period. And they're going to be somebody who, you know, may leave quickly just because they've done it before with another key person in their life, like a mom or a dad.
Gotcha.
And so it's not just it's not just spouses that people can give up on a relationship with. They'll give up on a relationship with a parent as well. So it's not just the person that you pledge your life to, it's the person who gave you birth that people can give up on a relationship with.
Gotcha.
And so it takes several years to get to that point. And so the people who kind of reach this point, and I haven't even really named it or described it yet, it's detachment. Detachment.
Okay.
And when people reach that period of detachment, many times it's, if they reach it early in their relationship, or earlier in their marriage, it's because there was usually a lot of maybe violence or abuse, things like that. But normally people will wait. I usually see detachment around the 10th, 12th, 14th, 16th year of marriage. I don't really see it around people who've been married 6 or 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
I'll see it through people who work through that difficult period or stayed together through that difficult period, and they still didn't feel connected. In fact, what they felt is emotionally deprived, and that's where people get to this point of detachment. And so what happens is they will stay in a relationship for, most first marriages last about 6 or 7 years. So these aren't people who just divorce at that period. These are people who will continue on in their relationship till year 12, 14, 16, maybe even longer. And these are the people who really are done with a relationship.
So why do you think that is, Brad? Why do you think people stay, longer even after they've had, a terrible relationship?
I think people really want to make it work.
Mm-hmm.
And they have kids, they have obligations to their family, they want to make it work. But I think where people get to this point of really being done, and let me describe this because we haven't even defined this yet.
Okay.
There's despair and then there's detachment. And despair is where somebody will threaten divorce or threaten being done, or they'll just completely shut down. So you have somebody being really loud, saying, I want a divorce, I'm going to leave you, that kind of thing. But they say that to get a reaction, or they shut down and withdraw into depression.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody is saying in the despair stage, I'm going to leave you, they'll go get marriage counseling. And this is where it gets really sad, Morgan, is most of the time the people I see who fall into detachment, this next stage, and I'll describe that in a second, but they fall into this depression where they withdraw. And often what I see is their spouse never really saw how withdrawn they were from the relationship, just how
So they had no idea.
unhappy they were in the relationship, because they never really. And this is what's tragic about this stuff. And I hate seeing this because it's terrible. It's really the worst part of my job. I see a lot of people suffer from infidelity, other issues, but this is really what bothers me the most, because I have a lot of hope for couples who've worked through an affair or who've experienced an affair or multiple affairs. I'm full confidence with that. But when somebody reaches a point of detachment, there's really no more hope left for them, because it's a very long process where this person has given up on the relationship and decided to let it die. So in the despair stage, when they're threatening to divorce, or when they start withdrawing from the relationship, they begin to grieve that their needs aren't going to get met. They begin to give up on the relationship. But it's at the beginning of that process. And detachment is they've gone through all that already, and they've decided just to let the relationship die and not to invest anything else in it. Mm-hmm. And people don't come back from that. That's what I've discovered. And I used to not believe in detachment. And part of that was because, for different reasons I won't get into, but I used to not believe in detachment. And so basically, when someone is detached, it's taken them a long period of time to get there. But the core component is they've given up on the relationship and decided to not invest anything else in it, and just decided to let it die. And they have no emotions about their spouse.
And I think that's a key indicator that you've reached that detachment stage, because if you think about it, some of what you're describing reminds me of kind of this protest and this anger stage where they're really looking and seeking and, maybe saying things to get a reaction from you, but then they kind of move into the depression and despair where they're really meaning what they were saying before about, look, I'm not going to stay. This is, we're going to get a divorce. And so I think people sometimes don't take their spouse seriously in those early stages, where they're like,
yes, I've had that happen too.
Where they're like, they always say that we're going to do divorce. Yeah. We never do it. It's a repetitive thing. And then they sort of like, it becomes an old rote
Morgan, that's
dialogue.
That's an interesting point. I've had people where their wives would say, let's go to marriage counseling. So they're not withdrawing into a shell,
right.
And just never expressing anything.
Right.
Because that's what I see a lot of.
Mm-hmm.
But there are times where, and this is really important, so if this is anybody out there listening to this, you need to really heed this.
Yes.
And you may have already experienced this, but I've had plenty of people where it's usually the wife, where the wife will say, let's go to marriage counseling. Mm-hmm. I'm really unhappy. And the husband says, no, I don't want to go. Right. I'm not going to do that. And what happens is the wife goes to counseling on her own, but does individual therapy. And a year later, she's done with the marriage and has begun an affair. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen that. And she also got to the same place of detachment.
Right.
In the process of individual therapy, she realized, I'm better off without my husband, or whoever, that person realizes they're better off without. And then they give up on the relationship. And it's something, there's like a year mark where they're like, I've been working on this for a year. I'm giving up on it.
I feel stronger as an individual. And this is part of how we've talked about this in some of our calls that we've done, our live calls, where individual therapy can actually be a precursor to divorce. You're not doing marriage counseling because your spouse refuses to go, so then you go do individual therapy. Right.
And part of the goal of the individual therapist is to say, I want to see you happy. Let's work through these blocks. And what happens is they don't have a concept of the negative cycle.
Right.
And so they're hearing
one side of the story.
Well, yes, but more than that, they're hearing the spouse of their client, being described as who they are in the negative cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So they're hearing like the worst. They're hearing, they did this to me and this to me and this to me. They're not hearing,
every time I ask, they ignore me.
Yeah, but they're not hearing, like, but I kind of insulted his kids, you know, or I closed his bank account and withdrew all the money. They're just talking about the reaction, and they're presenting it to the therapist as their super reasonable person. You know, they're not describing this is the crap I did and how hysterical I got. They're just describing how hysterical their spouse got. Mm-hmm. So the therapist is like, oh my gosh, you're married to a narcissist. Oh my gosh, you're married to, you know, a psychopath. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. And so that kind of stuff happens a lot. So what does that do to somebody is it says, oh my gosh, I don't need to be married anymore to this person.
Right.
And that happens a ton. Mm-hmm. I've lost count of how many times that's happened. And so, needless to say, detachment, I guess I've described detachment. Let me describe it again. Detachment is the state after despair, and it's the place where you give up on the relationship and you decide to let it die. And people who are detached, I want to say this real quick, people who are detached have no, they may love their spouse in the sense of I wish them well. Yeah. You know, I'm always going to love you because you're the father of my kids, you're the mother of my kids, that kind of thing. They may wish the person well, but they don't have any sort of emotional affection or connection or desire to connect to their spouse. And they, in fact, they would be totally okay if their spouse started seeing other people. They would, I'm trying to think of some other ways, characteristics of detachment. But the key thing is they've just given up on it. Mm-hmm. And they don't want to invest anything else. If they have emotion, they express it about their children or about something else, but never about their spouse. Like they are totally numb.
Or the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Like they may express, I'm just numb.
Yeah.
They'll say, I'm not sad anymore. I'm numb. You know, I'm done crying. I've cried all my tears. I'm just numb now.
Yeah.
And they'll give up on it. And now here's why this happens is you got people who start out super committed in their marriage. You know, they're like, you know, we made vows, we stood before God and man and committed our lives to each other. They are, you know, serious about their relationship. So how do they get over to this point, you know, 15 years later,
right,
where they're just done?
Yeah.
Is they get there quicker through domestic violence, you know, battery, physical violence, you know, that kind of humiliation. They'll get there quicker. Infidelity doesn't always get somebody there super quick, unless it's like a repeated type thing. Unless it's like a sex addiction and you start talking about it with family and friends and they're like, oh my gosh,
yeah,
you know, what are you doing here? And so physical battery will get somebody there much quicker. Infidelity doesn't always get you there super quick, but emotional depravity will get somebody to a place of detachment once they were, in the beginning, very sincere, we're going to make this work no matter what, but they feel emotionally deprived. And so what happens is they start kind of closing off and shutting down. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the people I've seen that were really detached, I think, were also very, very, very depressed individuals.
Yeah, and actually it goes depression and then despair and then detachment, right, in the stages.
Yeah, the kind of despair and depression are
kind of hand in hand.
Yeah, hand in hand.
Yeah.
And so, you know, they're very depressed. They've given up on their relationship, but they felt this emotional depravity, and they've decided to, I just can't do it anymore. And they don't care, you know, that, you know, if it's a violation of their religious beliefs to divorce, they don't care anymore. You know, they don't care about...
They've already justified it and everything.
Well, yeah, they're just so miserable. They're like, you know, I'm standing on the, you know, I'm just ready to jump off the edge. I don't care anymore. This building is too hot. You know, like I'm either going to burn up in this building or I'm going to jump off and die. You know, and so it's, they just don't care anymore. And so it's this emotional depravity. And that's kind of why if people don't work on their marriage, you know, eventually they're going to get to that point.
Right. So if you're hearing your spouse say, we really ought to go to couples therapy, we really ought to get some help, I'm really not very happy. Or they say things like, you know, I need time with you, or I want to, you know, why don't we work on a relationship? Don't think that it's going to get better on its own. Don't think that it's just going to go away.
Yeah, it will not.
No.
It will not.
No, you've got to take care of it, because it's only going to get worse if you don't work on it. So you can't bury it in the backyard, in a box. You can't go on a vacation and think that it's going to disappear. You can't read a book and think that it's going to be resolved. I mean, those things are good things, but honestly, you need to have one-on-one help. You need to have help from someone who can, create a plan of action for you and your particular situation. And if you are curious at all as to how we can help you, you can go to healingbrokentrust.com. That's healingbrokentrust.com, and check out some of the resources that we have there for you. We do coaching calls and we have retreats and various things, but ultimately, don't ignore the signs.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to say this. Many times these folks who will come to therapy who agree to go to marriage counseling, who are detached, are doing it because they're actually really nice people.
Yeah.
They're very agreeable, very kind, very considerate people. And they're going because they're just that. They're just considerate, kind people.
They really do care about their spouse, and that they care about what happens.
Yeah, they want their spouse to do okay.
Their kids to do okay.
Well, they're not mean-spirited.
Right.
But they're really there to kind of say goodbye. This is really how I feel. I'm not going anywhere. Now, people who get to that's the people I see that will come to marriage counseling. But there's people who are detached who, maybe aren't as kind and considerate. And so they will, who aren't as kind and considerate, and they'll just outright refuse to go.
Yeah.
To counseling. So they've kind of come to say goodbye. And what's really sad is these are often the ones I see are really kind, considerate folks. And it's just sad because you're just powerless to change. And I've worked with people, for a long period of time who were detached, who never came out of it. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes people who have an affair, let me say this differently. Many times people who are detached are in a place where they can have an affair. Now, everybody who has an affair, they're not detached.
It doesn't necessarily mean...
Yeah, it doesn't mean they're going to have an affair.
And it doesn't mean that if they have an affair, they're detached.
Yeah, they're not equal.
No.
It's not the same thing.
Right.
But sometimes they can go hand in hand sometimes, but not always. But the last thing is they don't really come back from it. Mm-hmm. And that's what's hard. And that's why working, with couples who've experienced this, it's tragic. And you don't really... Let me say this, Morgan, because I know I don't think you don't know if your spouse is detached. Unless you're kind of at that point where they've asked for separation. Let me say this differently, because I don't want to confuse anybody. If they're asking for separation, that doesn't mean they're detached. That could be despair. And so despair and detachment look really similar. Mm-hmm. And I am not quick to say someone's detached when they come to counseling. Because they could be in despair. And it's not my job to say someone's detached. If we might start kind of the counseling process, and if they stay there, they're really detached, they're gonna stay that place. But if they're in despair, they're gonna start changing over the next few weeks. And so it's not my place. And so what I would say is you gotta try. You gotta go get, like you're saying, you gotta go get expert professional help. You gotta work with pros who deal with this stuff. And that's why we got different locations to help people who are listening. And so you've got to really, it's not always clear cut, but you've got to, I think you only know when you try.
Right. And I know that when you do recognize despair for despair and detachment for detachment, you do let them know. But like you're saying, you take your time, because once you say, look, they're detached, that's
I'm not the judge.
That's hard, yeah.
Because that's too much power to give to a stranger in your marriage. And so I'll work with the one who is leaning in
Mm-hmm.
and say, this is what I think could be happening.
Right.
But it's not my call.
Yeah, so you're not going to say, hey, I think you're detached. I mean, because
No.
then that's not very fair, because
No.
then you sort of plant thoughts and ideas where
Yeah.
they may not be there.
Yeah.
You know, and that's really not helpful.
Yeah. Now, if somebody's detached, it doesn't always lead to divorce.
Right.
But I think it often does. You know, it doesn't have to lead to divorce, but I think it often does.
That's very interesting.
And if people choose, because what you're saying is I'm giving up on getting my needs met in this relationship. So people might stay together, but I think it often does, but it doesn't mean it has to. I think people often separate or have to, you know, redefine what our marriage is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're going to be co-parents for our kids. And it can be, you know, obviously it can be based on religious values. You know, what kind of religious values you have.
Or it could be just a really strong friendship that is no longer romantic. Is that possible?
I don't know. I wouldn't even call it a friendship anymore. I think they've given up on that part. It's a good question, but I wouldn't even call it a friendship anymore. It's more like just a coldness. You know,
aloof.
Well, they're just cold and don't care, and anything that their spouse tries to do just turns them off. Now, let me say this. This is actually really important. People who are involved in an affair while the affair is going on, not everybody, but many individuals who are in an affair can present themselves as detached.
Okay.
Okay? Like they can have similar characteristics as somebody who's detached and look like they're detached, but they're not truly detached like what we're talking about in this classic sense.
Right, because they're
Like
attached to someone else.
They're attached to someone else.
So they're investing.
Exactly.
They're investing in another relationship.
Yeah.
Not that they necessarily totally don't care about their spouse, but they've attached to someone else. So their attachment to their spouse is not strong.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good way to put it. Like, because they're attached to someone else, they, lose that attachment to their spouse.
Right, because their needs are being met elsewhere.
Yeah. And what we talked about in the previous podcast on the 10 types of affairs, that limerent affair that people get into where they'll kind of move back and forth.
Right.
I think there's an element of detachment that's there in some of those folks.
Okay.
You know, not all, but some. And so anyway, basically, and we'll be done in a second, but basically so many folks who are involved in an affair can present looking like they're detached.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they're only detached because they're involved in an affair, but they didn't get there over time like the other people did. So once the affair is over, they're not going to be detached anymore.
Got it. They're reinvesting in...
Yeah, they'll reinvest, but they'll reinvest kind of cautiously and carefully. But somebody who's detached is just going to be like, look, man, I'm done.
Right.
You know, I had the affair, it was a mistake. I shouldn't have done that to you, but I'm really just done.
And kind of like what we talked about last week, too, they're the type that will just spill the beans and tell you everything without regard to your feelings or anything. They're not trying to lie or withhold information. They just let you have it because they're just done.
They don't care.
Right.
Yeah, they don't care.
Yeah.
And so hopefully this has been beneficial. You may want to listen to this a couple times. Hopefully none of this is confusing.
Right.
And that's why I have Morgan here to help me kind of
organize some thoughts.
Filter some of this.
Yeah.
And so sometimes people who have an affair can seem like they're detached, but they're not truly detached.
Mm-hmm.
And so they can come back and reinvest back into their relationship.
Right.
And so they may be unreachable. This is not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about people like that. I'm not talking about, that's not detachment.
What's not detachment?
Somebody's involved in an affair and then they come back.
Oh, gotcha.
You know,
okay.
like, or they're involved in an affair and you can't reach them.
Mm.
And so it's...
Reach them emotionally?
Yeah, you can. Yeah. And often you can't. So they'll look like they're detached.
Oh, okay. So that's not necessarily what we're talking about here. We're talking about people who are truly emotionally done.
Yeah, done.
With the relationship, and they're, it could have been prevented with early detection.
Yeah, well, and sometimes, and this is where, just sometimes, people can have an affair and realize I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
That's common too. Or they could just have a friend of the opposite sex and realize, what, I can be happy without my spouse. I feel more of a connection to this other person than I do my own spouse. And so that can lead somebody who's felt deprived emotionally for years to a place of detachment.
Right.
And so
they're moving on.
Yeah.
Okay. So hopefully this was helpful to you guys, and hopefully you can use this information to help your relationship. But if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us at healingbrokentrust.com. Healingbrokentrust.com is where you can find lots of resources, and you can connect with us there through coaching calls and through one-on-one retreats. And we would love to hear from you. So definitely reach out, and we definitely wish you the best, and we hope that your relationship just gets better and better. So
yes, thank you for listening. And let me say this, Morgan. Last thought.
Okay.
I'm driving Morgan crazy saying this. I have total faith and confidence that you guys can work through this. I'm just mentioning this because this is an important part of the process. Mm-hmm. I'm always hopeful, always optimistic when there's not detachment.
Right.
And
we want to prevent detachment.
Yes.
That's
absolutely.
Our big goal.
Yeah. And so you guys can do this. I believe in you. Get the right help, and you guys will succeed.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Healing Broken Trust podcast. Are you ready to take the next step? Go to healingbrokentrust.com and schedule your one-on-one coaching call today. That's healingbrokentrust.com.